All right, welcome back to season 6, episode 2. We are in high summer here on the West Coast, and like many places this summer, we're having a bit of a heat wave. So if you see the odd trickle of sweat, it's because I had to turn off the air conditioner.
We have a fan that's working pretty good.
That's right. All right, so episode 2, we are going to start with quick cuts, and unlike our first episode, which hopefully you've seen our take on Maxine. We are going to do our own quick cuts instead of having the same one. So
Winnie the Pooh was a special
it
film.
was a special film, and it required a special quick cut for
Yeah.
that. So would you like to start us off?
Yeah, you're gonna hate me for this. So my quick cut,
I already do.
which I did last season, this is the first half of the Friday the 13th franchise. So I have a big whole blind spot in my horror history because I was a kid in the 80s. I always remember going to the video store and like Freddy looks cool and Jason looks cool. And I'd ask my parents if I could rent it and they'd like slap me and say no and make me watch like Home Alone or something. So I've been trying to make it a goal of mine to go back and watch some of those 80s slashers because that's a big blind spot for me. So I did the Halloween ones earlier. And so
Okay.
I've been tackling Friday the 13th. And I have to say, I went in with very low expectations and I've been pleasantly surprised.
Which is probably why you're pleasantly surprised.
Partly. So I've watched 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Wow.
And I feel like unlike the Halloween franchise, the Friday the 13th has a little more fun and doesn't take itself quite as seriously.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, I think from its inception, which was a rip off of Halloween,
Yeah.
I think it always took itself less seriously, and it was all about how can we make the most entertaining kills possible.
For
right?
sure. Yeah. And I'm kind of appreciating that. I think obviously like the first Halloween is the better film compared to the first Friday the 13th.
Sure.
But the later parts have actually been pretty good. So I think the standouts for me are 2, 4, and 6. Especially 4, which is shocking because you wouldn't think the fourth would be.
No, you wouldn't.
But it's got Corey Feldman, which I was so excited when I saw that. And he's actually like really good. And they have well-developed, interesting, likable characters,
Yeah.
which you're not used to seeing in slasher films. And I kind of like that summer camp vibe.
Yeah.
Is fun. So I think 2 and 4, they do a really good job of capturing that. 6 is like a full-on horror comedy. It's weird.
I don't know if I've ever seen, because I definitely haven't seen the one with Corey Feldman, so I don't think I've seen past 4.
Yeah, no, 3 and 5 were pretty bad. 5 was really bad, but 6, 6 is fun. It's got good kills, but they're kind of funny. It has like openly comedic moments when Jason like overestimates his own strength and like rips someone's arm off, and he like kind of looks at it and like throws it away. Like it's trying to be funny and not taking itself seriously. So yeah, so far I'm quite enjoying the Friday the 13th
Oh,
franchise.
there you go.
I'm less optimistic about like 7, 8, 9, 10, Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy versus Jason, etc. Those will probably be more painful, but
Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason on the Moon. Like,
exactly.
It got some
Jason Goes to
really
Mars.
silly. And I actually just wanted to come back to something you said at the beginning, because I just wanted you to know that when you speak, I want to hit you too. So it's kind of
That's fair.
it's
So if you want to go and watch some Friday the 13th, I would recommend 2, 4, and 6.
not even the original.
Oh, sorry, the original,
Yeah,
and then
okay.
2, 4,
That goes
6.
without saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, what was your quick cut?
Okay, so my quick cut.
A franchise review, or
It's not a franchise
Okay.
review, although I have 2 films. I'm not going to talk about both of them that were recently mentioned on Evolution of Horror. So this season on Evolution of Horror, which is not our podcast, by the way, but a podcast that I really like. So thank you, Mike Munzer. Evolution of Horror this season is doing, I think it's called Nature Bites Back.
Yeah.
And so he did an episode a couple weeks ago on Australian films, and we've talked about Australian horror films before.
Wolf Creek, we were talking about the
Wolf
other day.
Creek. So anyway, this was one of the 2 that he mentioned. One is called Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I haven't seen yet, and this one's called Wake in Fright. It's 1971. Now, it's definitely a psychological horror film, as opposed to, and it's arguable. I mean, I think Mike Munzer would agree with this. He has a bit of a reputation for having a fairly wide understanding of what horror films could be. So this one is so bleak and nihilistic.
Sounds like Australian horror to me.
Like, even for me, it was and it's a fascinating film for a couple of reasons, but just I won't give you. So the rundown is this: there's a rural school teacher who is heading somewhere for vacation. I think he's going to see his fiance, but he actually never makes it there.
Hmm.
And a bunch of very masculine things happen to him on the way. It's like, no, and this is very Australian men, like, you need to drink more, you need to fight more. We're going to go hunting. And there's definitely some animal cruelty stuff from the 70s that would not be acceptable now.
Like real? Like Cannibal Holocaust kind of thing?
Yeah. But with kangaroos.
Oh.
And that's not a fun segment of the film to watch. But what I found really interesting, arguably not as a real man, in 2024, just this idea that this man of learning, a teacher, is threatened by the hyper masculinity around him. And that's kind of the idea.
So is he not a very masculine character?
No.
Right.
He's deceptively non-masculine because he's good looking.
Okay.
He's a fairly big, fit guy, but he doesn't engage in the kinds of things that other men in Australia in 1971 engage in.
Right.
So he consequently, is trying to keep up with the gambling and the fighting and the drinking and the whatever. But it's so bleak because not only is it bleak in terms of gender, but it's bleak in terms of how they position Australia in 1971 as, well, there's nothing else to do, so we may as well drink and kill kangaroos at night, with our flashlights. And like, there's something to be said for they're trying to make something exciting happen where nothing exciting happens.
Yeah, Australian horror is really interesting.
It's
and
very
distinct
interesting.
and bleak, as you say. Yeah. I wonder what that's about. I've not been to Australia.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it has to do with the desolation and the bleakness of the landscape, right?
And everything there is trying to kill you.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's none of that in this one. Like, there's none of the typical, Australian, I saw a scorpion or I saw a snake or whatever. But it's very unnerving. It was not a pleasant film to watch. And apparently Picnic at Hanging Rock is similar.
Yeah, I feel like all the Aussie horrors are just really bleak.
Yeah.
I kind of like them though for that reason.
Totally.
It has a different feel, but you got to be mentally prepared for it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check those ones out actually. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Good pick.
So there you go. So that's our quick cuts for this episode. Now we are going to look at, if you didn't catch our first episode of season 6, which was Maxine. That we had come home from the theater and done the episode. This episode we've seen recently. Actually, we saw it in theaters.
We did see it in theaters, yeah.
Although we didn't run home and do the episode. 2024's A Quiet Place Day 1. This is directed by Michael Sarnowski, and my apologies in advance. Lupita Nyong'o, I think is how you pronounce her name. Joseph Quinn, who's the metalhead from season 4 of Stranger Things, and Alex Wolff, who we all know and love from Hereditary and banging his head on the desk.
I didn't realize that at the time until I went home and looked in the Internet Movie Database. With the beard, I just didn't recognize him. He looked familiar, but I didn't place. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's why I like that guy.
Yeah, totally. So 6.8 on IMDb, 87% critic score, 73% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So summary, a woman named Sam finds herself trapped in New York City during the early stages of an invasion by alien creatures with ultra-sensitive hearing. So, so this also this is the third film in the trilogy. So I think it's 2018 was the first one, maybe.
I think so.
something like that anyway. And that was, John Krasinski starred, wrote, and
Directed,
directed,
yeah.
and it was incredible. Like I can just
We
remember,
both loved the
yeah,
first one.
I can remember being so blown away because of what they were not afraid to do with silence in the film.
Yeah, it was a pretty unique experience. And there were stories of people in the theater like scared to eat their
Yeah.
popcorn loudly because they wanted to keep that sense of
Yeah.
quiet in the theater.
And I would say this is not the same intensity.
There was a lot of crunchy
film.
popcorn in the theater.
Yeah, there was a lot of crunchy popcorn.
Did you like the second one?
I did, but not as much as the first one.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
thought it was a bit meh, but it was fine.
yeah, it was fine. I think, and this is the problem, if you consider this to be a problem. This is my challenge, my problem with these kinds of films. So first of all, you have this banger first film, by somebody who's, he's been in television, but he's not like a known name. So I think when you're in that situation, you're willing to take risks that you don't take otherwise. Because like, what do I have to lose? I don't
Mhm.
have an established name, or like, now don't get me wrong, Krasinski obviously had an established name because he was in the US office, and he's done what is it, the spy series, like Jason Bourne kind of thing, but he's not Jason. I don't think he's Jason Bourne, but anyway, he's got a spy series on TV as well. All of that to say, so the first one I think was fresh and it took chances and it did things differently, and we didn't get to see the beasts until the end of the film.
That's right.
Almost. So the second film comes out and you're thinking, okay, well, it's going to give us a little bit more background, which it did.
It did.
To some degree, but you lose the surprise element of the monsters, and
Yeah.
you know that there's no surprise element in the premise, which I think I had said to you, like when we went to see this in the theater. I think the problem with these kinds of films is that you blow your load on the monster
Mhm.
in film one. That's it. You have nothing left to surprise us with. What I wanted to see from this film was not a human story about two people who look after each other in New York City. It's
Yeah.
like, I'd watch Harlequin romances if that's what I wanted to see, sort of. But it's true. I didn't want to see that. And it was so, I mean, I'll get to it later. I found it very predictable.
I agree.
Anyway, what I
And the
wanted,
marketing was deceptive because they're calling it day one.
totally.
So my thought is that, okay, we're going to like learn what happened on the first day and we're going to have like some revelations about these monsters.
Where'd they come from? What do they want? Why are they there?
But it was the same.
Yeah, I agree.
I was bored.
Yeah.
Like Winnie the Pooh was way more entertaining to me than this. I get what they were trying to do.
Yes.
And I appreciate what they were trying to do to some extent, but I feel like they really missed the mark in terms of maybe what people wanted out of this film. There's some positive reviews. I think if you went in and you were okay with the human story was fairly well executed. Or
Yeah, I think the performances were good.
yeah, I have some issues which I'll talk about, but it just felt like more. I'm full disclosure, I don't find creature features
Yeah, it's not
to be something that
favorite.
works for me.
Yeah.
Like CGI beasts, I just don't find that very scary. So already I'm going in with a bit of a disadvantage in terms of me finding that scary. But this just felt, we know, okay, hold your breath, don't make noise, sneak around. We know what the monsters look like. They're going to come kill you if you make noise. So the only sense of tension you have throughout the whole film, oh, there's one of the monsters. Let's not make any noise.
Yeah.
Oh, Buddy's going to make a bunch of noise anyways.
Yeah, totally.
And it was just so boring. I've seen a lot about the cat. Like, I agree. The cat was maybe one of the better characters.
Yeah.
So,
Which is not saying much for the film if you're saying a cat was one of the better characters.
I was bored.
Well,
Like, I didn't ever feel much tension or fear, or it's just like, we're just doing the same thing we've done in the first two films.
And that's exactly how you described it is what I wanted as well. It's like, okay, it's day one. Like, how did we get here? Was there some advanced intelligence that, like, are you panicking about? Do you know that they're arriving? Was it a surprise arrival? Why are they like the way they are? Like, there's a whole bunch of, like, the backstory of the things could have been pretty interesting.
One interesting thing I read, though, is that they changed the film quite a bit, or they changed the cut of the film. So they did test screenings And apparently they gave a lot of new information about the monsters,
Nobody wanted to
and
hear
everyone
it.
hated it. They were like, "Oh, that was crazy," or "That was way too much," or the direction they went in. So then
Wow.
they dialed it back. That's one thing I heard, and so maybe that's fair. But what you're left with is really the same old thing that you've had in the first
Yeah.
two, and now it's predicated on the human story. But I've got some pretty serious critiques of how they decide to execute this human story as well.
Well, yeah. So I'd love to hear those. And I just want to say before you get into that, I think the first one was a far more compelling human story
Agreed.
because you see the sacrifices that the families had to make. It seemed like a tight unit. You had a real human being who speaks sign. They seem to have lost that whole, deafness thing because I think that added a layer of complexity to the film.
For sure.
And that's part of the risk taking that I was talking about because
And I could feel the chemistry between
Yeah.
the characters. I cared about the characters.
totally.
You get the sense of like, okay, there's two parents and they're trying to protect their kids. Like anyone can kind of understand that.
Yeah.
Here, it's like, oh, hi. Okay, I'm going to follow you now for the film for no reason. And we're
Yeah.
supposed to care about you. I don't know. It was problematic.
Yeah, and I mean it's predictable. It was predictable to me because, we're not. I won't say anything because I'll say what I found predictable in the spoiler section because I
Yeah.
don't want to give anything away. But, so in terms of, would you do 1, 2, 3 in terms
Yes.
of rating?
Yeah, I loved one. I thought
Yeah.
one was great.
Okay.
Two, I'm more disliked than liked. I just kind of felt
It wasn't
already,
great.
I think, okay, like I get
Totally.
what we're doing here
But Cillian Murphy was good in that one,
for sure.
and I think
And they did reveal some stuff from the first day, I think, with their
Yes.
flashbacks.
yes,
So already they've kind of done what this film was purporting to do.
yeah.
And-
I was confused. Sorry to interrupt. I was confused when they said this was day one because
Mhm.
it's like I thought they'd already done day one, like they'd already done the invasion
They
part
did.
in 2.
Yeah.
So
And arguably better, the
Yeah,
flashbacks in that
yeah,
film. I think.
exactly.
And I didn't watch a trailer. I just knew it was called Day One because
Yeah.
I've been trying to avoid trailers. But then I
for
was
good
like,
reason.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit baffling. I get that. I mean, you could go back to this well 100 times. Okay, here's these humans on day one. and
Yeah.
here's these two characters in day one. But I don't feel like the monster or the concept is that compelling that I want to watch multiple films about, okay, we got to be quiet. And I feel like if you're going to do the day one thing, maybe one of the most interesting elements is getting to that point where you actually discover, like, hey, we need to be quiet.
Yeah.
They figured it out in like 30 seconds off screen.
Yeah.
Okay. He's like, shh, don't talk. So it's like, all right. So
How would you know that? Like, how would you know that that's what's cluing them into?
and that I felt was going to be like a big part of the film
Yeah.
is them going through this process and a bunch of people dying and making mistakes and like some big revelation where they realize like, oh, it's noise. We need to be quiet. Within the first 5 minutes of the action.
And the problem with that to me too is because if you already knew that on day one, why was it such a revelation in the first film when they figured out, oh, they actually don't like intense noise,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so we both agree like 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
In terms of how good the film is. Well, no,
You go ahead.
so I was going to come back to that idea of creature features, and I talked in season 5 about having gone back and watched the original Godzilla from 1954, and then I watched Godzilla -1.
Mhm. I really want to see that.
And what I really appreciated, so coming back to this idea that you're talking about creature features, because they never really do it for me either, unless like in Godzilla, and I think this is what they were trying to do in this one, but they were unsuccessful. In the original Godzilla, it's partly technical challenges, but we didn't see a lot of Godzilla. It's kind of like
Exactly.
Jaws.
Yeah.
If Jaws had worked, it would have been a completely different movie. But because Bruce didn't work,
Yeah.
the shark, they had to do things differently. And that's what made the film, because they suggested, they
Yeah.
didn't show you every time.
When it's left to your imagination, it's scary. When it's like,
100%.
oh, here's the CGI creature, and they show them crawling
Yeah.
all over the city. Like it doesn't do anything for me.
No.
And I seem to recall the first Quiet Place, they didn't show much of them
No, they didn't.
for a good portion of the film.
It wasn't until very close to the end Like you heard them
Right.
when they were playing the game. You heard the thing running through the bush when
Exactly.
his kid got taken the first time.
That's way freakier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to this idea of, first of all, yes, sometimes it's helpful to show, not tell.
Mhm.
But when you're trying to maintain suspense, then you need to tell and not show. Like you need to demonstrate. And for a movie, for a creature feature that's on its third installment of a film, if you blow in the first film what damages the creatures, you've got nothing left really, as far as I'm concerned, for us to go to the theater for.
Yeah.
It's not like Dawn of the Dead, for example, or Night of the Living Dead. If we look at zombie films, and I'm not a huge zombie film fan, but the good ones are the ones that take the tropes that we know and expect and subvert them.
Mhm.
So you're in a house the first time, then you're in a shopping mall. What's he doing with that? Then I think Dawn of the Dead is with the military.
Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And then there's Dawn of the Dead later.
Yep. Land of the Dead.
Yeah.
When they're in like the casino or whatever. Yeah.
And then if you consider the genre of or the subgenre of zombie films, the good ones do something different. 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
It's fantastic because it changed some essential elements.
For
we
sure.
knew what we were getting with the zombie.
Now they run and they're super terrifying.
We didn't know that they were going to run and chase you down. And that, like the opening scene in that one with Cillian Murphy's character, I think it's him, in a deserted London. Like there are just things that you can do to challenge the expectation of your viewer.
I agree with all that.
Right.
And in this case, this film's already been covered in the flashbacks in the second one.
Yeah.
And then my other critique is like, if you are going to then focus on a human story, maybe you need to take more than 10 minutes to develop your characters.
Yeah.
So that you care about them to have a human story. The main character, Sam.
Yeah.
She reads one little story or poem at the beginning about hating everyone or everything being shit.
Yeah.
She wants pizza, and she has like one conversation with like the nurse guy.
Yeah.
And then the action hits, and then you can't talk and you can't develop the characters anymore. Yeah. She is a good actor.
Absolutely.
She had some good like expressive acting, and like you could get part of her character from that. But I wasn't attached to her character in any way, shape, or form when things start going down 10 minutes into the movie. And then the other characters in the film arguably don't get any development. And when you can't talk, it's kind of hard to develop your characters. So if they wanted to do a human story, I felt like they should have invested like 30 or 40 minutes into the characters first. And then when the stuff happens, then you care about them and there's tension. But for me, she was arguably not even a likable character.
I was going to say, they kind of set her up as a bit of a
she's
wench
pretty grumpy
yeah.
and like not likable at all. So when we go from like suddenly I'm supposed to like really care and be attached to this character, I felt like that was a big problem too. So I don't necessarily mind if you want to focus on the human story part, but then I feel like you need to develop your characters. And when your monster is predicated on you not being able to talk, then how do you develop the characters? I mean, they do a few things that kind of work, but it felt like too little too late. Like I think the reason this movie felt flat for me is I didn't care about her, and I didn't care about some of the other characters that they meet. Some people cared about the cat. The Sam and Frodo thing was cute. I like what they're doing there, Sam and Frodo, and they walk a lot. That was pretty funny as a Lord of the Rings fan. But I feel like it's interesting, like some people are like, oh, I was in tears when I walked out of the theater, but I wasn't moved at all.
No.
And there's one cool scene in like a jazz bar that I could see would have been really impactful had they developed those characters first.
Yeah.
But it almost felt like, okay, I can see you're trying really hard to have this poignant moment, and the acting is good, arguably. Like her acting is fine, but I feel like it was the writing and the direction, the decision to rush right into the action and not take enough time.
Yeah, because I 100% agree with all of that, because if you look at, I think his name is the actor's name, Joseph Quinn. Joseph Quinn.
Yeah.
So if you look at his character in Stranger Things, I mean, it wasn't a huge character, but arguably it was an interesting character because he was an outcast, he was the D&D guy that nobody liked.
Yeah.
And he's able, like his character arc is an opportunity to redeem himself in his community. we don't have any idea why this guy is so timid, why he's so afraid.
No.
Like not that the situation they're in isn't something to be afraid of, because that would be absolutely terrifying. But considering how grumpy she was with people she knew at the hospital,
Yeah.
the fact that she kind of softens and allows him to follow her around, you don't know who this guy is. Like this could be an excuse for a serial killer to just go on a rampage.
Yeah.
Like
I didn't care at all.
yeah, so I certainly wasn't moved at the end to tears.
No.
And like I said, I found her character arc very predictable. Like I wasn't
100%.
far into the film where it's like, pretty sure I can see what's going to happen
Yeah.
here.
And I'm not blaming her acting.
No.
And there were times where you could see like, yeah, the expression on your face is very emotive, but I didn't feel like her character was likable enough, to be honest.
No. Can I, just before we go any further, can I just give a shout out? So we've got some Night Watch. I think it's Lighthouse.
Yeah,
breweries.
coffee lager.
Yeah, coffee lager is quite good.
Yeah.
Wish you were here sharing it with us.
I wish I was drinking coffee before this movie. I was almost falling asleep because I was so bored. Should we get into spoilers maybe?
Yes,
Because there's a few things. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of recommendations, do you recommend Quiet Place Day One?
I do not recommend this.
I don't either. I guess if you're like a super fan and you loved the first two, but even then you might be disappointed because I don't know.
I think so. I would say if you're a super fan, go back and watch the first one.
Yeah.
It was like, I would way rather go back and watch the first one than watch this one again. So
yeah. I didn't really enjoy it at all. I was quite bored. There's some good acting, but yeah, I would say pass on this one. And I think we might be in the minority. I did see some positive reviews and people who were really moved by the human story.
I didn't think the high scores were warranted either, like 6.8 and 87% critic score.
That's shocking to me.
Yeah, that's it's high.
It is high
for a horror film.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I do not recommend this one.
Okay, so you obviously have some
spoilers.
Yeah. Spoilers.
Okay, so I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
Okay, so another issue, and I get what they're going for, and I get it's sort of poignant. But when the main drive is I want a piece of pizza, like that is the motivation for your main character.
Yeah.
So like there's
silly considering the circumstances.
There's not, I mean, okay, so we know that she is on death's doorstep. She's dying. She's in hospice. Yeah. So I get that they're kind of going for this, like, yeah, maybe when you're about to die and you don't, it's almost interesting, right? It's like, oh, sweet. So there's an apocalypse, but I'm going to die anyway. So it's almost the best case scenario because there's no FOMO. The worst part about dying is like you missing out on, but if the world's ending, like it's the best time to die.
But at the same,
but then they go back to, okay, so if there's nothing to live for, it's the little things in life, like enjoying your last slice of pizza, which I get. But if that's the whole sense of tension, the reason that she's doing everything in this movie is to get to a pizza place, that just felt weak to me.
And I'm sorry, was it a surprise that it was closed?
What did they think they'd be there, like serving? Yeah, what's your order?
It's like the city is in turmoil. There's like burned out cars and things smoking and like these, crazy tulip things wandering around on huge legs, killing people.
So was it your understanding that they were expecting it to be open? Because I'm like, really?
Well, that's what I'm like. Really? Did you expect this to be open? Because there should be no shock here.
No, that's crazy to me.
And even so, we're in the spoiler section, so my apologies. But even in his love of this person that he's never met before, he goes somewhere else, and there happens to be pizza there. So I'll just you don't know how long that pizza's been sitting there, like whether rats have taken a shit on it.
I mean, I get enjoying your cold pizza in the apocalypse or whatever, but
I'm sorry.
That didn't work for me.
No.
And
it was 100%. We've already mentioned that she was terminal. I'm like, I wonder if she will die and try saving everybody in the process.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, we've seen enough films that there are some absolutely mind-blowing and incredible films, but Hollywood keeps coming back to these ridiculous tropes, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it's like, you're telling me with 100 years of movie history, you couldn't think of a better way to have that character arc go other than she's going to die. So she's going to save the person that she just barely met.
Yeah.
And her cat, by sacrificing herself, which is fine. Cause I could see somebody in that position. Okay, well, I'm terminal.
Mhm.
So I'm going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to die anyway. So what difference does it make? But in a film where arguably people are getting paid to write this stuff,
Yeah.
then write something more interesting.
I know we've talked about this, like we've never had this debate yet, and maybe we won't today, but like this whole concept of elevated horror. Like to me, it felt like they were trying to make an elevated horror.
Mm.
Like we've got this monster movie, we've got this setting, but we're gonna focus on this character and
Right.
she's about to die, and her and this other guy, they're gonna have this like relationship, and it's all about the pizza. And
And the
it
cat.
seemed like they were so caught up in trying to elevate that they kind of lost sight of like what people are looking for in this kind of film. I don't know if that's a fair. And that's where I do think this term elevated horror does have some credibility, because I think, having just watched a bunch of Friday the 13th movies, like in no way is Friday the 13th Part 6 trying to be elevated.
No.
It's
No.
the studio knows we're going to make money, we're going to show TNA, we're going to have kills, and we're going to have Jason, and that's what we're doing. And I think horror for many years, in many different subgenres, that is their goal.
Yeah.
But recently it does seem like we are trying to have more human stories, have more elevated, or like to have more technique, like Ari Aster and Mike Flanagan, and like we're making really good films that happen to be horror films. And it seems like this was a case of like we are trying to like tell a very poignant human story. It's all about the characters, but it just kind of failed. Is that what do you think about that?
Would you, if we removed, do these creatures have a name?
I don't think so.
Like the, xenomorph has a name. Like, do they have a thing? Because I don't remember.
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not like a Quiet Place scholar.
Yeah, fair enough.
But there
okay.
might be.
So if we removed the creatures,
Yep,
would this be a horror film for you? It might not be a horror film with the creatures, but even if we remove them, what are we left with?
No, I guess. I mean, walking to the pizza store with your cat.
Yeah, I mean, it's more like there's not a comedy, but it's more like a romantic drama kind of thing, as opposed to.
Yeah.
Okay, so then do the creatures, because we've seen them in 2 other films and there's no surprise element, we know what they're about, we know what they can do. If we now add those back in, does that actually make it a horror film? Because I would say no, it doesn't. Like, just the fact that those creatures are there and there's some harrowing moments, I don't think that makes it a horror film.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The first one, absolutely.
Yeah. There are some moments, I guess, where they're running from the monsters. Like the one scene that kind of worked for me, there was in those tunnels with the water, and
that was good.
Chasing him through like that. I kind of get into a bit, and actually, that might be the only thing that was revealed, because doesn't it just drown? Like it dies, right?
Yeah,
like quite quickly.
Yes.
So I feel like that's maybe the only thing we've learned about these creatures, is that maybe they're susceptible to water, or they can't breathe for a very long time or something. I feel like maybe that's the one thing we learned about these creatures that we didn't know before.
But I really hope that doesn't mean we have a 4th.
Oh, I think there will be. Well, they already are. Because didn't the second one kind of ended with a cliffhanger of what's going to happen?
Yes, that's right.
So I think this was like an in-betweener while they finishing the third one.
Okay.
And that's where I almost feel like this would have been like a really good short film. Like almost like a promotional idea to get people psyched up for the third film. Make a 10-minute short or 15-minute short about these characters. She's terminally ill. She's trying to get pizza, whatever.
Yeah.
That might be really effective, and that might be really good. And you can make a short film to get people pumped up and excited about the third one. But as a full-length feature, what they're trying to do here, I think doesn't work.
Or even use some of the sequences that you filmed as flashbacks, or as something to do with the invasion day or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, use some of those things. But I just feel, again, coming back to the idea of...
Sorry, I didn't let you finish your thread there.
No, but I was thinking as you were talking about, the difference between the first one and this one. we've talked about the idea of there's a more compelling human story in that one. There's also risk taking in many ways because there's the suspense of not knowing what these things are. We get a sense pretty quickly that they're in, grave danger. But then, of course, in the first one, John Krasinski's character sacrifices himself for his kids.
Mhm.
That makes sense to me
Yes.
because as a parent, that is something that I think many people would do, not everyone, but I can see it's like, yeah, okay. If I had to make that choice where my kids could live longer because I've already had a life and it was up to me to sacrifice something for them,
Mhm.
that makes total sense. Sacrificing something for a complete stranger, even when you're terminal,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily ring true for me.
I think that's the biggest weakness in the film is just really no reason to believe why these two characters care about each
Yeah.
other. Like, you met 5 minutes ago, you had no reason to really hang out with each other. You can't really talk and get to know each other, and yet we're supposed to buy this
Yeah.
like really close
It's
relationship.
like you're needy and annoying, and she's just too tired to tell you to bug her off. So
Yeah.
now you just end up hanging out together.
Yeah, I didn't buy that part. And even then, so she helps him,
Yeah.
and she survives. But then she almost like commits suicide. Like even her final act of like playing her dad's music or that song.
Yeah.
You're not actually saving it at that point. You're just kind of ending it.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought was meant to be the finale, is that she's
Yeah, what's coming
Yeah.
because the creature drops down at the end. But you could have kept trying. You get some more pizza around town, or I don't know. Like I didn't even
it
see.
can't be
why
the
she
only
had to do
pizza
that.
joint that was still open in the apocalypse. Come on.
To your point about horror, though, I think another issue with this film is it's PG-13.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
So the carnage of like when these creatures are coming and
Yeah.
attacking people, because it's PG-13, they're not able to show
Yeah.
these things like ripping people to shreds and having a
Yeah,
lot of
that's-
gore and stuff. And I think
That's fair.
that's maybe part of the problem, and maybe would have made it feel more like a horror film.
Yeah.
But it's hard to buy these creatures as super terrifying and intimidating when they're not really, like, they're kind of like whisking people off screen or whatever. But I wonder, had it been rated R and there'd been some more gore, or like these things feel very threatening and dangerous, that maybe would have helped. But again, I'm sure for money making purposes, they want to have a wider audience.
Yeah.
Let's keep it PG-13.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, I don't know. Other than, no, I'm looking at the wrong one. I was going to say I already said the IMDb scores higher than what I would have expected. Yeah, there's not, for me, not a lot redeeming in this film.
No, I think her performance was good. I get what they were trying to do. It might have worked better as a short film, but ultimately, like, I was so bored. And that's probably not what you should feel in this kind of movie. And I don't mind human stories. As you said, I think the first one had a far more compelling human story.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately, this one was not one I'd recommend.
Well, and coming, again, what you've already mentioned is that the first one, even though we had those scenes of being quiet, they invested in developing the family dynamic. We understood that everyone understood their sign language and their symbolism, and that they understood what was at stake, and that they were still trying to have this normal existence where they played games and they did these things. So it was far more of a relatable experience than,
Totally.
okay, well, here's a young woman who's terminal in New York City or wherever they are. That's not really a relatable experience for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and again, had they taken 30 or 40 minutes to develop her character
Yes.
first, then maybe I really would have cared. But I feel it was 10 minits? Like,
Yeah.
it really was two
It
or
was
three
not much.
scenes.
Yeah.
And all those scenes were just making her seem kind of unlikable. So I feel like that was one of the bigger issues. Was just, had they maybe made her likable and invested more than 10 minutes,
Yeah.
then maybe that would have carried you through.
Yeah, for sure.
And the other guy too.
Yeah.
But the characters were very underdeveloped for a human-centric story.
Yeah, you can get away with that if you're doing a creature feature where the focus is on the creature.
Yeah.
And like
That's right.
your humans are just fodder for the creatures.
Sure, yeah.
Then you don't need to develop anything. But if you're actually trying to make us feel something, well, then we need to invest in the characters. We need to feel like, oh, it's a loss
Yeah.
that she's gone or that she has to sacrifice herself or whatever. But there was no feeling of that whatsoever. It's just like, oh, sucks to be you. It's
So if anything, this has actually like dampened my enthusiasm for the third one.
Yeah.
If we'd had the first movie, the second movie, and then a really long break, and then okay, the third one's coming out.
That's what I thought. I thought, oh, this is going to be great because they're going to fill in all the backstory.
Yeah. But now I'm almost like, oh, another, like, I'm so sick of these creatures and this idea of like, okay, let's be quiet. And that moron, when they're in the water, he's like, he's like breathing so loud. It's like, dude, your only job is to be quiet. And you're making like, why are you breathing that loud? Give me a break. That was so frustrating. I'm like, seriously? Like, your life is on the line. You'd think if that's not enough motivation.
No,
Yeah.
not enough.
Anyways, thumbs down. Do not like this one.
Okay.
I
That's
don't have anything else to say.
Yeah, I'm not recommending this film either. So it's too unrecommended. What am I trying to say?
The film sucks. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but it's not working.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else to say about this one before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. Sorry if you love this film and
sorry.
we're really dumping on it, but
yeah. I'm sure the next one we do will have very positive things to say.
I'm sure it will. All right, you'll have to stay tuned next episode, see what it's going to be.
Yep. All right, we'll see you in episode 3. But until then,
we'll actually see you in the aisles.
In the aisles, yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Have a good one.
Okay. Ciao.